Welcome back, everyone, to an really different type of square episode. I'm really excited to have these three beautiful, strong women with us today. And we're actually going to be talking about something that we have not talked about before in a lot of detail, but we're going to be talking about both abusive relationships and toxic relationships. And these women have been really brave to come and share parts of their story. And I'll be sharing part of my story too, which I'm also nervous about because this will be the first really public space that I'm kind of sharing the details of this. So I think we all have a little bit of nerves, but I think we've all felt that we are called to share this and hopefully impact or help someone. So super excited. Thanks for tuning in. I'm gonna go ahead and have y'all introduce yourselves, and I'll start, I guess, with Nat because you're closest to me on the screen.
So my name is Natalia, and I'm also very nervous. This is the first time I'm publicly sharing this outside of my very private, intimate relationships and the people who helped me through this process. So I'm definitely nervous, but I'm really excited. And thank you, Max, for creating this space for us, because this is part of healing, the ugly part of healing sometimes, but thank you.
Thanks for being here, Nat. And just to let everyone know, Nat and I go way back. We have been friends for a very long time and kind of both found ourselves in the situation at different parts of our lives. So thanks for being here, Nat.
I'm Jaysalee. I am a senior in college, and I'm also really nervous. I've only shared my story publicly once before, and I did get a little backlash from the person themselves. So I am a little nervous, but I am excited because I agree with Nat. This is part of healing. This is part of growing. So I'm ready to help and to heal and grow within myself as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jaysalee. For those of you, again, who don't know, Jaysalee used to be one of my former students back when I was still working and teaching at a high school. So excited to have you here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Gabriela Hernandez. I actually go by Gabby for short. That's how everybody knows me by. I am from Sacramento, California. I am a single mother of 3. And actually, I've been sharing my survival story for quite a few years now. So it's been part of a healing journey. It's been a part of me being an advocate for other women that still live in fear to share their story. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of this, because yes, we all have a story. Yes, we all have a purpose to share this story, and also to be a support for other women that are still kind of in the early stages of their healing and, their process of being able to share their story. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of this.
Thank you so much, Gabby. And Gabby and I actually connected on Clubhouse, which is an audio app. And I heard part of her story that she shared and felt the need to go reach out, and we connected. So I'm so grateful that you're here too. And so you guys all know me because this is the Strong Women of God episode, but I'm Maxine, and I am excited, but also very nervous, as I mentioned at the top, to be here and sharing pieces of the story, because again, I also have not really shared in a public space. I have shared it in smaller quarters of Bravely Rise, my retreat organization, but definitely feeling a little anxious tonight. So one of the big pieces, as kind of I was going through this or getting out of it and trying to heal, as I was reading other people's stories and connecting with other people's stories. And the one thing that really struck out to me about sort of being in these abusive relationships was that there are patterns, and there were sort of things that like red flags that are so consistent throughout people's stories. And even with the three of you, as I've heard pieces of your story, I've seen sort of these things that stand out. I would love if we could start off with just, in a very sort of condensed way, sharing a little bit about our stories.
I graduated high school, not in a relationship, but kind of with somebody. They were extremely verbally abusive. They were very toxic. I think I cried almost every week with this person. They were really intense. But I stayed with them. And when I got into college, I met someone new. And right away, like, I left the other person and I kind of jumped into this new relationship super quickly. And this guy was super sweet. He was, I guess, what you would consider like the good guy. He was really nice. He, did everything that I had wanted the other person to do when I was in high school. So I felt very overly in love with this person super quickly. And we grew really, really close. We moved in together my first year of college. We got super intensely close and things were going good. And then slowly, as I got a little bit more involved in college and I got into more clubs and into more stuff and focused on school and work, I stopped becoming more available to him. And that became a really big issue. He started getting very overly protective of my time and of myself. And then he got a little bit more intense. It got to the point where I couldn't even be alone with my friends that were girls. It was very controlling. I got very depressed. I was in counseling. I was going to counseling once a week for myself, once a week for relationship counseling. And I was also just doing everything I could to just heal, but nothing would work. I did make a lot of mistakes within my relationship. I was not perfect. I was toxic within myself. But it was something where no matter how much I would tell him, I was miserable towards the end, or that I wanted a break, or I needed to walk away. We found a way to keep coming back to each other. It just never ended. And it got to the point where one day he just said no to me. And it was like, we're not ending. That's not a thing. We can take a break, but we'll still be together. And it took me physically having to like leave the facility and leave the area for us to agree to a breakup. And it still follows me. It's fairly fresh. He still talks about our relationship. He still talks about the mistakes in our relationship. And it's gotten to the point where it creates a lot of triggering moments for me, because I meet people from my school, or sometimes people who aren't in my school, who tell me things about my relationship that I didn't even know them when I was in the relationship. So there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes. And it wasn't a physically abusive relationship, but there was a lot of mental abuse, a lot of controllingness, and it was just an intense time. It's something that I'm still healing from, something that I'm still moving forward from. It's just been a little difficult, because no matter how much I try to escape it, there's always someone who like knows something or gets a new piece to the story or brings me back in. But that's just a little condensed piece of everything that I've been going through.
Thanks so much for sharing that with us. And again, I do want to highlight this, that there are different types of abuse. And so we're going to be talking about different versions of that throughout today. But thank you so much for sharing that piece of your story.
I was single for 6 years before I jumped into this relationship. I had been, walking with God. I'm like, I'm going to wait for my husband. I am going to do everything I can to work on myself and be this woman of God and have this walk and all these things. And then this person came into my life and I was like, this is it. Like, this is the one. And said all the right things, did all the right things in the beginning. Of course, it was just like the best version of that person was what was shown to me at first. And so, I thought I was so in love and I was so into this situation. And slowly but surely, I started seeing insecurities. I started seeing toxic behavior. I started to pay attention to the way that they spoke about their previous partners and how crazy and toxic and abusive they were. Like, I started to pay attention because also one of the things I forgot to mention before is I actually dealt with triggers really bad, because I work with immigrant survivors of violent crime, domestic violence, and human trafficking. I do it every day for a living. I stay and interview the most gruesome and the most abusive and violent and just abuse all around. And so as I'm doing this work, I'm going through emotional and mental abuse at first. And I'm like, okay, because I don't have a black eye, or because you can't physically see the bruises everywhere. I'm not in an abusive relationship. These are just issues that couples have, right? And so as things got worse, it got physical. Because I didn't have a black eye doesn't mean he wasn't, holding my hair down for a 30-minute car ride, and let a lot of abuse, right? Even at one point physical. And so I really struggled with that. I really struggled in accepting that I was in an abusive relationship when I'm supposed to be helping people in abusive relationships. And I was stuck. There was a lot of shame. There was a lot of, how can I cover this bruise? How can I, there was a lot of I was just very private about it. And the shame of being in this relationship, we actually moved in together. I moved in with this guy, and going to church and being this Christian woman of God who worked on this relationship so hard and prayed so hard and did all these things, but I'm living outside of his will. Clearly, there's no, excuse for that. And I felt a lot of shame, and I couldn't speak to the people who I felt I could speak to before. Max was the first person who that day after that IHOP talk, I'll never forget that conversation. That was the first time. The abuse was so bad I could not hold it in, and I just verbally vomited all over her. And she was actually the first person that I shared that with. So it was mentally, physically, and emotionally very, very abusive. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Nat, for sharing. And, I want to be mindful too, because I know for some people who might be watching and you're actually going through this right now, it also might be triggering. And one of the things that I learned through this is things don't get better if we kind of run away from them and if we don't deal with what's happening. So before we continue sharing stories, I just want to urge you to stick with us, to listen. We're going to pray with you too at the end of this, but just stick with us. Gabby, go ahead.
My story, actually, I am a survivor twice. I went through seeing domestic violence with my parents, and I encountered some later on when I got to high school, when it got really intense. So my dad started attacking me verbally. I mean, it was strong until one day he did attack me. And then I ended up in relationships that were with my sons, my two older sons. That was more of a verbal situation. But when it really got really intense is the person that I ended up marrying, which is my daughter's father. And I didn't realize that the red flags were there from the very start. And that consisted of how he talked about his past relationship, even his relationship with his mother. And then when he started talking about my family and how he didn't agree with being with somebody that was there for their family, always supporting them, helping them. And at that time, I was still living with my mom, with my two children at that time. And so he was very persistent with telling me, I'm not going to be with you if you're going to be living with your mom. And to me, because I was such in a very vulnerable and broken stage, because at that time I was actually grieving for the passing of my dad. So my dad had passed away in 2004 of cirrhosis of the liver. So I also grew up with an alcoholic father. And so I didn't realize those things later on after I had left, when I started counseling myself. But it was very physical. It was very verbal. It was very emotional. And it had also became to a point where it was financially abusive. I had to hide money. I had to hide the fact that I had opened another bank account. But the very first encounter of the physical, honestly, I don't even remember what the cause of that argument was. I just remember coming home from work like a normal, regular day. I had picked up my kids from childcare, and my routine was to get home, change my clothes, and start dinner for my family. And while I was in the process of changing my clothes, he started arguing with me. Next thing I knew was I was headbutted. When I was headbutted, I just remember seeing white specks and me trying to gather my vision because I couldn't see anything. It became a blur to me. And next thing I knew, I was being thrown against the wall. I remember being called, words after words after words of just being belittled as a woman. And I remember hearing my kids crying. And next thing I knew is I saw my daughter right there crying, calling for me. And that's when I finally was like, can you stop? Like, leave me alone. Let my daughter come to me. And he was like, no. It got to the point where he then grabbed me and I could literally feel his skin, his nails digging in my skin and tossing me on the bed. But when I recall that moment, what I do recall, and I mean, till this day for me, it's very triggering, is that I saw literally a dark person. It was for me like looking at the devil in the eye. Mm. That's how intense it was. I do not remember feeling like this is the person that I thought I was in love with, that I had a child with. As of lately, when I recall back to those red flags, I should have known that the biggest red flag was when I was pregnant actually with our daughter and he was cheating. Yeah. But for me, it was one of those, well, let's work through it. I have a daughter on the way with you. And we worked it out. It was one of those things that where you threw it under the rug and just forgot about it and never really talked about it, never even brought it up. It was like it never existed. But also my kids encountered abuse behind my back. So when I would be gone to work and they would have to stay home with him for whatever reason it was, maybe childcare was closed that day or something, or school was out and they would decided to stay home. I didn't learn about the intense abuse on my sons until they started counseling. And it was one of those things where he had threatened them. If they would tell me or tell somebody in my family that he was going to make sure that I was going to disappear. And so there were encounters where CPS did show up, where police would come, because my older son did actually tell school one day and they showed up, but he ended up telling the police and CPS that it was something that he made up, that it wasn't true. And when I asked him about it, he was like, I just feel bad for my sister. I don't want to do that to her because I don't have my dad. So I knew that was intense for him. And it was, when it came to my children, it was one of the worst feelings ever as a mother to know that my kids were exposed to that, just like how I was as a child. And that was something that I had even told him from even before we even got into the relationship, that was something that I did not want my kids to go through. And it happened. 2015 was my last straw, when I was called every name in the book and I was spit on. That was like the biggest disrespect for me, was to see the person that I married and had gone through all this spit in my face. And I couldn't believe it. But at that moment, I was like, you know what? I have to leave. I have to go for the sake of my children. I packed clothes and important documents and never looked back from that day on forward.
Gabby, thanks so much for, again, sharing. I know that is still difficult, even though, it's weird because, you're removed by time, but any little thing can kind of bring you back into those spaces. So thank you for that as well.
Mhm.
I was newly saved, maybe less than a year, I think. And so I was very green. I was very naive. And though I had come from a difficult past and had dealt with lots of different things and even other types of abuse, I had, I don't know, I had these like God goggles on almost, and thinking like, hey, now I finally made it to a place that's safe. I can let my guard down. Nothing bad is going to happen to me ever again, because, I'm in Christ now. And I know that's very naive, but that's just where I was at the time. And so when I met this person, I had no clue. I could not have written it out. The one thing that I noticed is that prior to that time, I had been single for a long time as well. And at the time, I wasn't necessarily honest with myself, because I was feeling like I was in a place where I was finally good to be single. But in reality, I had just like found out that like the one true love of my life had like moved on in like a big way. But I was kind of like, all right, I'm just going to let that go. But I jumped into this relationship, if I'm really honest, on the heels of not really being healed or ready for it. But this person was super engaging. He had a confidence that was appealing to me. He wasn't necessarily physically what I would normally be attracted to, but he was confident, and he was a man of God, and he prayed and he served, and all of those things that I thought, this is good. You can make do with this. You can learn to fall in love with somebody, that kind of thing. And we initially had really great conversations. Like, it felt like I could just like, this is who I am. And I was hearing stories about him as well. So the one thing that was really a problem was that everything moved very, very quickly, like so fast. Like, I met him one day, and then within a week, I think he was asking me to be his girlfriend. And a week later, he's talking about marriage, and that we need a bank account together to save for the wedding, and like all of this stuff. And in fact, the piece of not opening a bank account together was a major point of arguments all of the time. And thank God that my mama was always like, you make sure you have your own money no matter what. So I never did that step, but it was a constant point of argument. And a lot of the stuff, again, it started off very subtle. And I think that is probably common for a lot of us. It was very subtle, with like little things of disrespect, little comments, little things of making me feel like I'm not that pretty, little comparisons to, exes who, like, my ex never had to put on makeup. Why do you have to put on makeup? Like, like just little digs that just kind of grew in scale and in time. There was also a lot of cheating. There was also a lot of like addictions to porn, and just like making me responsible for that. There were a lot of those things happening. What made it incredibly difficult was that also he was very into grand gestures. And so he would do something and then come back full force with this thing that I have never experienced before, right? This huge showcase of outpouring and nonsense. And there was very little space. So he had a problem with everyone in my life and everything in my life. He was trying to get me to leave my church to go to a different church. He didn't like some of my friends, or almost all of my friends. He had a problem with our pastors. He had a problem, like literally everyone and everything that was around me, he had a problem with. And so I did become a little bit more isolated. I kept up the ruse of like, everything is good. I kept running my groups. I did like things like that. But in my day-to-day, I'd become isolated. And I didn't really tell anybody what was going on. I was having mood swings, major issues, but I was being very vague about what was going on. And I even would tell my friends versions of stuff that wasn't like full. It was like, yeah, I'm upset because of this thing. And they'd be like, oh, roll their eyes like, all right, why don't you just like, and I couldn't get around to the point of saying I'm scared. Because part of this was also, there were lots of threats of suicide. his end, and then eventually escalating to, I'm going to hurt you. And I kind of didn't believe it until he hurt me. And then I kind of became like really alarmed and afraid. And I will say that it was just one incident of physical abuse, but it was very bad. I was really sick that day already. I think I had like bronchitis or something. And so I literally could not fight back. I was laying down on a couch. Nothing was happening. He had just done a beautiful, like, grand gesture. Like, nothing happened. Nothing set it off, like, that I could think, except that we were getting ready to like watch a video or play a game or something like that on the screen. And I kind of said like, hey, I don't want to do that one. And it was like a test to like see like your psychopathic tendencies or something. And I was like, I don't want to do that right now. Cause I was like, I don't know what I'm going to find out. Cause I was already having my suspicions that something is wrong here. And he was like, why don't you want to do it? I was like, I just don't. Can we just do something fun? Like, whatever. And everything was calm. And then seconds later, next thing you know, he's over me. And he tried to suffocate me. And he dug his whole body weight into my body. I couldn't breathe. I was not understanding even what was happening. I couldn't move. I couldn't fight. And Gabby, I relate to you because I saw that vacant look. Like, if it was almost like if it wasn't him, like it was like something came over him. And I don't know. I can't remember what I even was thinking in that moment because I don't remember. I just was there. And I was in shock. I still didn't understand what happened. Nothing. I was bruised. I remember my friends came over sometime that weekend and I was like, no, I just have bronchitis. I'm just sick. I can't get up. I can't get out. But really I was bruised. I was having a hard time. And I just hit it. And somehow, some way he worked his way back, and grand gesture after grand gesture. I'm sorry, this is not blah, blah, blah. And if you're a real Christian, you'll forgive me. I did. And it was very difficult. And the other types of abuse never stopped until the end. And from that point forward, he would just have to like sort of subtly hint at threatening me for me to be like, all right, fine, I'll just drop it. And so I lived in fear. And so even after finally kind of making my break eventually, I was never the same. And I know Nat and I, we've talked about this too, just of having this persistent fear, because he would show up to my house unannounced sometimes. I remember kind of living in fear and being afraid to tell anybody because he did have this image of the Christian guy and serving, and he was known at my church as well. And I thought wrongly, I found out after the fact people didn't really like him, but no one told me. But I thought people liked him. And I was like, no one's going to believe me. And I did go through another form of something in college and I was not believed. And not only was I not believed, but I lost my community because I was not believed. And I was deathly afraid of losing my community here. And this person knew that because I had explained my past. And so he used those pieces against me during this. And kind of made it seem like nothing was going on. These are 4 different perspectives, 4 different stories and things. But what I'd love to do now is kind of connect some of these dots.
I'll say, for me, the red flags were, 1, the discussion of his previous relationship. And I think he tried to cover up like what he was trying to do to get back with her. And without saying it, he was stalking her. And then not till later on, his family told me that she had a restraining order on him.
Wow.
My ex, I was his first everything, his first girlfriend. So I had the complete opposite experience in that aspect of, he was really new to things. There was nothing for me to go by. I just kind of went off of the fact that he was so nice, and kind of similar to like Max said, like he wasn't really my type. And I think for me, I just loved his personality. Like he was just so fun. He was just someone I felt like I can open up to. And I think I didn't notice the signs really until I was out of the relationship. It wasn't until I had completely removed myself from the relationship that I was able to stop justifying a lot of his actions.
Yeah, so the way that this person discussed their ex was definitely a red flag, just because she was crazy and she was very intense and she wanted to be with him, and like just so many different little red flags. But it also those red flags that were raised in me were, I grew up in a home where adultery was a thing. So I had this fear. This toxicity started to come out where I'm super like hyper vigilant of like, oh, if it was trying to get back with him, is it still a thing? Like low key, is he trying to hide something? Are they still like those little red flags happen? Same. This person was not my type. I wouldn't say physically right away. Like it no. But because their personality, stood out, it was like, okay, maybe because this person grew up a Christian, maybe God, has something special there. They had no relationship with God. And the red flag that I also saw was their sex life. They were hooking up with people. They were very just, they did not have a relationship with God. That was the biggest red flag. But also, they were like on dating apps, or they were just having hookups and one night stands and stuff. And I found that out early, but I thought that person had changed, and that was major.
Yeah, I think that was something that I noticed with mine as well. And so it's funny, Gabby, until you said it right now, I didn't even connect it. But the talking about the ex and like, kind of making a scene. But if I'm looking back at it, he was doing to her exactly what he was doing to me when I was trying to get out. And so and this is big red flag, like day one, he asked me to be his girlfriend. And immediately after he asked me and I said yes, he said that he had to go down to visit his ex-girlfriend, who I had not like really heard of before, because he wanted to just like talk to her in person and let her know that he's like moving on. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Why would you have to do that? Yeah. Oh, well, you don't understand. Like, we were together for this long and I still help her. Apparently he was helping her pay for tuition, which I don't know how, because that's another situation. But there are apparently all of these things. I'm like, how are you ready to start a relationship? And so minutes after being on this high of him asking me to be my girlfriend, I was crying. And he was basically trying to put it on me as if like I'm insecure and if I don't trust him. And of course I don't trust you. I've known you a week, but again, kind of pushing on that like Christian space of like, don't you trust me? Don't you blah, blah, blah. Like what's going on? I'm not your past, like all of these things. That was an immediate like red flag. And moving forward, that situation would continue to come into play as like the comparisons were happening, but still saying that she was always lacking in something, right? That she was this, that she was that, blah, blah, blah. And so, I wish that I would have noticed that and taken heed to it. So I definitely think pay attention to how someone talks about their past is a huge piece. Something that kind of came up too is just the way the person behaves around other people or friends. Anybody notice any differences or changes or flags on that?
Yeah, in the beginning, I thought my friends liked him, right? Because he was just a kind guy. He was very quiet or whatever. But every single time without fail, and I cannot remember not one time where we hung out with friends or a holiday or a special event where it didn't end up in an explosive fight based on insecurities, based on this person did not like any of my friends and had something to say about each and every one of them, except one person who he wasn't threatened by. And I mean, even in church, I would, be walking to the car down the street and I would run into someone who I knew, guy or girl, mostly guys, I think. I can't really remember, but it would be an explosive fight. It would be, he just, it's a power struggle. It was always a power struggle. And so now I know my friends from the very beginning were like, something's off. I wasn't really into, something was off. They noticed little things here and there. But my friends now are, they saw things that I did not. But when you don't speak up about these instances and these explosive situations, and I'm telling you, every single time we went anywhere with anyone, any holiday, when they don't know you're going through something, they don't know to connect that. And I think it's scary to kind of, rain on someone's parade. But now I'm finding this out. So.
Off the top, every time we went somewhere with my friends, it was like he had to poke his chest out to make himself noticeable. Like, look, it's all about me. I'm the man. I do this. I talk like this. If you don't like it, get over it. It was like he was always demanding respect. Mm-hmm. And would literally always say it. You're going to respect me and I don't care. So, you know how they say a first impression is an everlasting impression? Everybody would always tell me, no, he is not the one. And the very first day when I introduced him actually to my best friend, I mean, her face, till this day, I still can see her face. She was so like, oh no. And she made it clear, like, no. His energy was very dark, just like how when we would go through our incidents, it was very dark then. Just his demeanor, his presentation, the way he spoke, and even just like how he would kind of shut himself off when I would go to family functions. He was never around. And that was a red flag, because I should have paid attention to the fact that he doesn't have a relationship with his family. So when it came to my family, he didn't like that I had a relationship with my family, and he wished that I was like him.
Wow. So I had this impression that people liked him, and I didn't know. But again, sometimes I think our body does tell us things. I remember having to go introduce him to my family, and I was terrified. And I had introduced like my ex-boyfriend to my family. I didn't feel that same sense. I was nervous, and the entire time throughout the dinner, I was holding my breath. And like, please, like, I want him, like, please, Lord, let him say the right things. Please, Lord, let them like him. And I'm wondering, like, why was I doing that internally? Mm-hmm. You know? And also I have like a older family friend as well, who's like, has been just like an amazing support system. And I remember we went out to dinner with him and his wife, and I found myself holding my breath the entire time there as well. And what I found was inconsistencies in stories. And so I would have a conversation with him one way, and then, this person would ask him the same question, and now he had a completely different answer that made it look like he wasn't as invested in me. So it embarrassed me. It just essentially embarrassed me, right? So with me, he's talking about marriage, blah, 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 all this stuff. And then there he's like, oh yeah, I'm pursuing this, career in Hollywood, and I'll be leaving. And like, just kind of like it's nothing. And so I'm like, I'm introducing you to like people that are super close, and you've now just embarrassed me. And then trying to have the conversation around some of those incidents, because it was very similar, Nat, to you, of like anytime we had stuff with other people, there would be something that happened afterwards. And me trying to understand him and ask questions and all of this stuff, it would just always get turned around on what I did wrong. And why don't you know how stressful it was for him that he had to be in that space where he didn't know people and he did the best, and all I want to do is fight and argue and talk about what he didn't do right, when it was really just like, hey, talk to me through your decision process there. Like, why'd you decide to present yourself that way? We had that same conversation and you never mentioned that. So I found that. And another note on friends is that he didn't have very many solid friendships in his life. Which was also a flag.
I had a little bit of a similar experience too. When I met my ex at the time, he had a lot of friends. He knew almost everybody at my school. I was a freshman coming in. I was super nervous. I met a lot of my friends through him, which was something he would throw in my face and towards the end of the relationship. Like, well, why are you hanging out with them? Like, if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't even know them. And he was liked, but he was kind of looked at as like a little brother to a lot of people. He wasn't taken seriously from a lot of people. He wasn't well respected. And I noticed that as soon as I got into the relationship. And I had a similar experience where he was always talking about these friends and holding them to super high standards, but I rarely ever saw them. They only came around if I would invite them over, or like if I did that extra step to really like push them to hang out together. He isolated himself and me from people. But I had my roommate at the time and a little group of friends, and they got along really well at first, like brother and sister, best friends. And then slowly but surely, she started to not like him. And she wouldn't tell me. And instead of talking to me about, you know, all the flags she was seeing, she just completely separated herself. And he would kind of use it as like, well, look, she's an awful friend. Like, she just left you. I didn't know there were a lot of other things going on. And like that I just wasn't seeing. And I lost a huge group of friends who refused to be friends with me while I was dating him. They just didn't like his aura. They didn't like him. And he was one of those people who, when we were together in public, and he was my first boyfriend, so I really didn't know. I feel like there are rules sometimes that we just don't know about. And there were just some things he did that I didn't feel comfortable with. Like, he was very big on PDA in front of friends when we were hanging out, and that made people super uncomfortable. Like, he would always bring up all of the insecurities in the relationship in front of people, and kind of how Gabby was saying, where he needed to like push out his chest. He did that often too. And I didn't realize a lot of these things until I heard you guys talking about it. I'm like, wait, he was doing the same exact thing. And it bothered me, but I didn't do anything. And that frustrates me. But I eventually got a new group of friends while dating him. And that was a big blowout. They got into like verbal arguments very often. And it got to the point where they just tolerated him, and he was constantly talking about them, and it was just negativity all around, and it was really not a fun time.
Yeah. Wow. One of the things that I think is so confusing when you're in this is sort of like kind of looking like, does this person have multiple personalities? Like, what's going on? Because when things are good, they're really good. Right? Super sweet, beautiful gestures, opening up. You think that you're seeing this person, and then it kind of like, I don't know, switches in an instant. And so some of the things that I want to talk about is like, did you guys experience like that back and forth of like, you know, these grand gestures, and then also like these grand tantrums on the other end, and, you know, empty promises, or, you know, in my case, like also like, you know, the first time that I tried to like ask for a break, he basically was like, you know, I'm suicidal. So like, if you do this now. So I was like, okay, well, this is not going to happen right now. And my heart is soft towards that because, you know, I've been through seasons of depression. I've been through seasons of, you know, suicidal thoughts and all of that. So I didn't want to be responsible for that, you know, and that was very early on. I'm talking about maybe 3 months in. I'm trying to like, I need to get away from this situation. So I'm just curious, did anybody else see that like really great, good guy in there, and that kind of made you stick around? But then on the other end, this other stuff.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Same.
Yeah, I definitely experienced that in the sense of this person in the beginning, like they became my best friend. I would be with them all the time, and movie nights, and just a fun person, right? We actually had a good time and enjoyed each other's company in the beginning. I liked this person, like I enjoyed their company. And then when things started to, you know, take a turn, their demeanor changed. Like I remember looking at this person in the face and I'm like, you don't look like yourself. Like their entire face would change. Like it would be like looking at a different person. It was weird. It was just like it was just crazy. And so the tantrums. And, you know, at one moment you're laughing and having a good time. And the next moment, you know, I was being like dragged into a different room, or being told I couldn't leave, or being told that just threatened with certain things, and tantrums, and the throwing themselves on the floor. Like it was just all it took was a second, a comment. Once I remember saying something that may have made this person insecure, because this person was obsessed with my past and the people from my past. And I think that came out of that like toxic, like the whole ex thing, like that I mentioned before, because little red flags. And I found I remember finding a bag full of her clothes in his closet. And I was like, what's going on? Like those little things that started that toxicity. I don't know if that's what it was, but it led him to become obsessed with every detail of every person that I had ever been with before, that I had dated before. And so these explosive things, I would say one little comment that he would misconstrue, and they would end up in fights where I would need to leave, and I would be pinned down to the bed, to the couch, to whatever. I couldn't move. I couldn't physically leave the situation. And that person made sure to assert their power and know that I couldn't physically leave, even if I wanted to.
Yeah.
And that was a big, that was a big thing.
Wow.
Yeah. Completely can relate to that, to an aspect. I think that there were some times when at the beginning, my boyfriend was my best friend. He helped me through some of the hardest things, and he was really there for me. And there was just something about him. And when I saw him, like I knew like physically, like he just wasn't my type, but it didn't matter to me because like he just meant so much. But as time like passed, he changed, like, and I know that I was not perfect in the relationship. And I feel like in times we talk about toxic relationships, and, you know, we don't always like point out certain things. Like I know in my case specifically, I wasn't the best, but I definitely don't think that I deserved a lot of what I did go through. And it was just like I was with someone new. It was like we went away for the summer and we had a few issues. And when we got back to school and we were back in motion, it was a completely new person. He did not feel comfortable with anything. He was not fun anymore. He only wanted to stay inside. He hated socializing with people. It just like all of a sudden I was on house arrest, and everything was an issue. And it got, when we broke up and months had passed, I did see him again, like just one time to just talk and kind of reconvene and leave things on good terms. And I looked at him and I felt like I was looking at a complete stranger. I did not know or even feel anything towards the person who was sitting in front of me. I did not, it was just a completely new person. And I think that's really scary to think about this sometimes. Like, people can change so deeply from what they go through or from themselves. And sometimes it's scary to look back and think that maybe that was the person I was looking at the entire time and I just didn't notice.
Yeah.
So it's a little scary when you look back and think about how far things could have gone had you just continued on.
Yeah. It's true. By the grace of God, you know, we're not in those situations anymore, but it is definitely, you know, it makes you a little nervous entering the next relationship at times, because you're wondering, like, you know, am I going to miss it again? Am I not going to see it? The thing that kind of was used against me, and I don't know if there were things that were used against you ladies as well, but I did also have that feeling of like, I can tell this person so much and I want to be open. And so I shared a lot of pieces of my story, including some very deep things that I was still struggling with. And so when we would argue, those were the things that would be used to come back at me, that I said like in confidence, because this is, you know, my person now, and now they're being used sort of against me. And I know that, you know, for me, another thing was there was an insecurity for sure there present, because I had more education than he did at the time. I was in the middle of completing my master's degree. And this was a a constant fight of him telling me like, well, you think that you're smarter than me, and you think that you're this. And it was just like constant poking at everything. And I don't even know where he got that from, because we didn't have that many conversations. So what he would do, I guess, to offset that is say that. And then when I would start talking, he would yawn. He would be like, because whatever I'm saying is boring. So he'd be like, or checking his watch as I'm like saying anything. It's just like making it seem like whatever I have to say is like unimportant. And this was so severe that I honestly, my graduation came from my master's, which is a big deal. It's going to be the first in my family to get my master's. And I didn't go to my graduation because it was such a huge contention point. And that's the one thing that I really, 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 really regret. And I just told other people, oh, I'm just like not feeling it. I don't really care so much. It's not a big deal. But it was a big deal. It was a big deal. But because I didn't want to get into another argument surrounding it, I chose to not do it. I did share with my previous relationship, who was like love of my life. You know, this is the guy that I thought forever would be with. I shared that with him, and I shared that I felt like I had let that relationship fail, like it was on me, and I hadn't done enough to like, you know, sustain it, and that was a big regret of mine. And I shared that. And so he knew that going into this next relationship, I didn't want it to fail no matter what. So I was going to work through anything because I didn't want to carry another relationship failure. I have to say a fun fact or a good thing here, that love of my life is my husband today. So it worked out. But at the time, you know, he used that against me for sure all the time. So you're just going to let this fail. So you're just going to let this fail, when I would try to like back out and leave and do all of those things. So I'm wondering if there were any, I don't know, little details that you gave, you know, your person that came back around in arguments, or to make you feel ashamed or stay, or whatever the case may be.
Yes, that was like, I think for me, one of the biggest things during like arguments and stuff. He would always throw a lot of things that I spoke to him privately, especially things that I was not open to just anybody. The biggest thing for me was I am an immigrant, and I'm still currently dealing with it. I am under DACA now, but that was probably the reason why we got married, because he used that against me. Well, I'll help you get your residency, and then you can help me. But he would never say what he would want from me. And so that was like the biggest thing that he would use against me. Well, I'm not going to help you. Since you want to act like a bee, then I'm not going to help you. Since you want to be immature, I'm not going to help you. Go find somebody that will. And also, it was like a jealousy thing with my kids. I should have really never went into details about my son's father, because then he would use the comparison. Well, he's never done this, and I have. Well, he's never gonna do this, and I will. And so also, because he had such a jealousy rage with my sons, because they were so close to me, that it was always a constant battle. It was never satisfying to him. He made it seem like I shouldn't cater to them. Why do you baby them? So that was very, very deep in our relationship, about his jealousy and insecurities.
Yeah. Wow. That is tough. And I think, you know, I've learned from this experience that time is the best thing. And I think that it is really common sometimes in these relationships that things move very fast. And I know for me, that's exactly what happens. I'm always weary, like when my friends are rushing into these big milestones with people, like, yes, now we're boyfriend and girlfriend, or we're moving in together, we're opening a bank account together, we're engaged, and all this stuff. And I'm not saying that it doesn't work out sometimes, but that's the exception, not the rule. Sometimes it works out, but more of the times there's something fishy going on as to why the guy is moving so fast without knowing. And so for me, all of this happened within the span of 1 year. That's it. That's all it took. And I saw the first signs of something, you know, wrong right away, you know, but because there was such a push, and he was actually going a lot faster than I was comfortable with. But he kind of presented it in a, like, don't you trust me? Like, don't you believe that God brought me into your life? Don't you believe? And I'm like, well, yeah. And also he was older than me. And he was also older in the faith than me. And so I was kind of like, well, maybe he understands things a little bit better than I do. And yeah, maybe this is, you know, me being insecure, and maybe this is, you know, so those things were kind of coming up into play in my mind as well. And then there was this little dark thought, and I don't know if this came up for anybody, but when things were really, 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 really bad, I have to say, one, I felt the closest to God that I've ever felt. I've never prayed like that in my entire life in the midst of those crazy times. And it was almost like I had to see something through. I had to see something through to the end, and to be able to like fully get out of it. When did you decide to leave?
You were the first person I told, and I just remember, like, as we were going through the discussion, we were roommates when I started this relationship, so you were there from like very beginning to the end. And so I had to tell someone when it had the physical aspect of it. The physical abuse was just it was scary. I was scared because I didn't know what else they were capable of. You see, this person would always throw around like, I'm a lawyer out here. I can't. They had a lot to lose if this came to light, right? But they were still capable of doing this stuff. And so that just right away scared me into, you know, what else is next? They weren't mentally stable, and I realized that really quickly. But it took me several times. Because this person used the fact that I wasn't on the lease to take the key away, and I had work and I couldn't get my wallet, my clothes, my shoe. I remember once I left in like flip-flops, no wallet. He's like, we fought for the key, and I was bleeding in a stairwell for I don't know how long, waiting for something. Like, it was to the point where I couldn't physically leave, and he needed to know that he was in control of that situation too. And so it took several times, and it took getting people involved to actually physically like pull me out of that situation. With people present, I wasn't able to physically leave on my own and by myself, but when people were around, he couldn't reveal that dark side, that part that I was talking about, that different face that wasn't revealed around other people. It was just when we were one-on-one. So it took several times for me to try to leave and, you know, stay with my mom for the weekend or whatever, however long. Started affecting work. I remember once I just couldn't. I was dealing with so much craziness. Couldn't even get back into the apartment because he took the key. And I have 2 coworkers that I trust until this day. They've been the most amazing support. I broke down. We sat in an office and I broke down. And so that was when I knew that it was affecting every single area of my life. And it took several times to leave. But yeah, it wasn't until other people were physically present and people knew, and this person knew that people knew, and he was embarrassed enough to allow me to just so.
And I know, Jay, you kind of mentioned part of your story about kind of having those interventions with your friends too.
Yeah. I think everyone, at least on my part, a big chunk of people were rooting for us to kind of end things. I think the world was kind of tired of seeing us argue. We argued all the time, everywhere, no matter what the case was. I don't think I went towards the last 3 months of my relationship. I don't think there was one single day that passed that I didn't get into some form of argument. You know, maybe not like a big blowout argument, but there was definitely a confrontation. But I think I did have an intervention. Like, my friends did sit me down, and that same day I did end things with my boyfriend at the time. And I was a mess. Like, I felt like I was the toxic one in the relationship when I was going through the breakup, because I knew I had made so many mistakes. So I justified a lot of his actions through throwing myself under the bus. and was like, oh, it's okay if he's, you know, super jealous. Well, look at my past. Or it's okay if he doesn't feel comfortable with girls, like my friends that are girls, because, you know, he likes being around girls all the time. I mean, he, you know, definitely made it known all the girls he thought were very attractive in my friend group, or that he wanted to be with in my friend group. But I couldn't do the same. There was a lot of double standard. I was an RA at the time. I couldn't have guy residents in my room alone. Residents that had girlfriends, little kids, they were younger, they were freshmen at the time. So it was just a lot of stuff, but I ended up getting back with my ex after my intervention. It didn't feel right. It didn't feel like that was the way for me to end things. It didn't feel like that, like there was a lot more that needed to be said, a lot more closure that was needed from both sides. And it really took, we broke up. I went home for summer break, and I didn't physically see him because he lived far, but he was messaging me all the time. And it really took my mom having to step in and was like, we will get a restraining order if he does not stop reaching out to you, because I was physically getting sick from the relationship. I don't think people understand the amount of mental abuse that it can do to your body. And like, I gained 20 pounds at least. My acne was insane. I developed tendonitis. I'm 21 years old. I have tendonitis from stress, from high levels of stress, and carpal tunnel from high levels of stress. And that only would have, like, I'd get pains. Every time we'd argue, I'd get shooting pains, and I didn't know what it was. He didn't know, and the doctors couldn't figure it out. And when we broke up, months passed, and suddenly there were no pains, there were no issues. I lost weight, and my family didn't really say much. But when we did break up, they did say like, oh, well, he was, like, my further family, my immediate family, they were like, well, he was kind of making you ugly. You can tell, like, you were miserable through the whole thing. And I was like, well, it would have been nice to know, you know, to at least tell me. But I think people should step in more. I don't think people step in as much because they're scared to say something, and you feel like it's not your place. And sometimes it's not. And there's definitely a time and place for everything. And you shouldn't tell someone to break up with their significant other, because I don't think that's something we can take and then do. You can't tell someone break up with him and then we'll go and just break. It's harder. It's easier said than done. But I think saying something and bringing it up to people, and because as soon as my friends really started putting it on my radar was when I started noticing. Prior to that, my friends, before my new group of friends, had never really said anything about how toxic he was. And it wasn't until we broke up that they said anything. So I think that had they said something sooner, maybe I would have noticed, even though it was right in front of me.
Yeah. It's so hard, I think, even in these situations, because like, you're right, like there are times where people just don't want to hear it. Like, they're in what they're in and they don't want to hear it. And it's hard being the friend in that situation. And I know for me, I didn't really have, I remember at the beginning, like right before we even had started dating, I had a friend come up to me and say like, hey, like, I know something about this guy. And I'm like, okay, what do you know? Like, because we weren't dating yet. It would have been great for me to have whatever piece of information she had. She's like, oh, well, I can't tell you because someone else told me. And I was like, why are you like, what kind of half answer is it? So it caused a problem right off the bat with me and this person, because I was like, well, if you have information that's important for me, why would you not give it to me? And so I went into the relationship kind of like, well, I don't have anything, so I'm just gonna like go into it, Mm-hmm. And I remember there was one instance because, again, coming in from, I was in a very insecure space by the time we had kind of been through all of our ups and downs and everything. And I got to a place where I thought that I had deserved what I was going through, which is insane, right? Because you're like, Christ saved me, he forgave me of my sins, but then I'm also, well, here I am reaping what I sown. And like, I've had some destructive patterns in the past, blah, blah, blah. So maybe this is just what I deserve to be going through right now. Maybe this is just going to be my life. And so I had to deal with some of that as well, and say that, there were times where he would message, like he would send me an email and be like, okay, like I've done it this time. I slept with 3 million girls or whatever the crazy thing that he said was. And so I know I don't deserve you. So, I'm going to leave. And I'd be like, what? Like, you're not gonna have a conversation with me. And it'd be this whole thing where I'm like, no, I need closure. I need to figure out what happened. What the hell, like what's going on? And that also kept us in a cycle. My need for understanding and having closure kept things going on and on and on. And I totally take responsibility for that aspect of it too. But I remember like the closest I came to telling someone what was going on while everything was happening, I failed. And I won, but I failed. But, you know, and I talk about this in Bravely Rise, but, you know, I was in such a bad space with everything that was going on. And I was like, I'm never getting out of this. This is just going to be my cycle. Like God didn't forgive me. He doesn't love me. He sent me this. He did this. And I actually drove myself to a hotel, and that night had intention of taking my life. And I was literally saved by God. Like I walked into the hotel and somebody had left a card on the bed, like a little tiny business size card. And I just like grabbed it, and it had a message, and it was like, telling me that God was with me and that I would find rest for my soul in this place. It was such a small thing. And to this day, I don't know who left it there, because I know it's not the hotel. The hotel's not, it was not a Christian hotel. It was a, you know, name brand hotel. And it was there for me. And I broke down and I cried and I sobbed and I dialed the numbers of two of my closest friends. And I just gave them an address. And I said, please come here. I didn't say anything else. And they showed up. And I had nothing to say. I opened the door and I sat in my bed just crying and waiting. And they just sat in the chairs talking to themselves. They didn't ask me, like, you know, like they could see that I was in a state, but they had no idea what I was actually going through. They knew I was having issues with my ex, but like, whatever. And I didn't say anything. And I fell asleep. They were there. Woke up the next morning. They weren't there. And I never said anything. I just never said anything. Until after the fact. And my straw, you know, that broke was that he sent a message to my mother. And so this was after I had already like, I need my space. I'm out. I don't need to do this anymore. I actually booked a trip to Cuba and I went for a week, and to actually physically remove myself. And, you know, there were issues there too. There were threats, and I'm going to call blah, blah, blah. You got to stay on the phone with me till this or this. And I'm like, and I remember myself once he sent that message to my mom, like it crossed a line for me. And I just like, man, do whatever you're going to do. Just do it. I was just so sick and tired of it. I was like, do whatever you're going to do, you know? So I think, you know, it's different for different things. And I don't know how I would have reacted had somebody come to me to tell me. Part of me thinks I would be relieved, because I didn't know that anybody knew what I was going through. But I did hear from people like, you're not the same, like something's wrong. You don't look like the same girl. I want to thank you ladies for coming and sharing parts of your stories, and just, you know, obviously this is not a full conversation. We could sit here and talk for 8 hours about all of the things that we've seen and been through, but the biggest piece is that there is a way out. And, you know, I don't want anybody to walk away feeling ashamed for having been in this situation. And it's okay to be scared. It's okay to be scared, because for many days, even after I finally like broke off, until I moved from the state I was living in, I still woke up feeling scared, even though it was done. You know, I would still get nightmares. I would still get all of these things. And so it is normal. Don't feel bad if you started a healing journey and then you have a bad moment and you're like, oh, I'm not healing because I'm feeling like this today. That's not the way healing works. Healing is not a linear line. There are ups and downs, there's lefts and rights, but dealing with it, seeing it through is what's going to get you through to the other side.
It's really important to identify and to be able to relate to being in a place where you feel you deserve it, whether it was because you were so toxic and you put this person's mental toll on, like, whatever it is that you feel that you deserve it, you don't. No matter, like, nobody deserves to feel less than everything amazing and worthy and everything that they are, no matter who's, like, what relationship you're in. Or I just that's a big thing. I felt deserving at one point because I had been toxic myself. And, you know, when this person called me crazy, I'd be like, maybe he's right. Like, maybe I make this person cry. I put this person through hell. Maybe, you know, I deserve this as, I don't know, punishment, and that guilt of Christians forgive, and that last straw of like, of whatever that was. But seeing how God moved, God is in that. God is going to show you things that now you're like, oh, that was God. Like, whether it's dreams, like for me personally, it was dreams. It was, the day I was actually moving out, there was a cop on the corner who did not move, was not a sign there, who was just there. Like, there are so many different things and so many ways that God moves and shows and reveals certain things, whether it's the cheating or whatever it is. And there's relief in that, there's peace in that. But that's a big thing for me, because I sit with women all the time, and you know, whether it's like the legal interviewing aspect or whatever the case is, whether their immigration status is being threatened and they're being threatened to get deported or whatever the case is, because I work specifically with undocumented immigrants who go through these horrible experiences. You don't deserve it. That's the biggest thing. And I think that as we have these conversations, that comes up a lot, the feeling of I just have to put up with it because it's comfortable, it's safe, because financially I can't provide for myself and my children, so I'd have to go to a homeless shelter and put myself and my children at risk, or whatever the case is. Or I mean, there's so much, but that's one of the major things. Nobody deserves that.
Yeah. Thanks, Nat.
And I add something too. I was just gonna say something I think everyone should remember is that things get better. One thing for me, I know that all I knew from college was my boyfriend. My friends were his friends, my clubs he was in, my classes he was in. All I knew was him. So one thing that definitely kept me in the relationship was that fear of like starting over, and that fear of like not finding someone better because I had made so many mistakes. I kind of felt like I didn't deserve better, or like this for some reason. And I know like it definitely goes deeper into like childhood stuff and a lot more psychologically, but for some reason in my mind, like this was it for me. Like it just felt like this was it. There was nothing else. Like starting new, ending, like it just didn't seem like an option, even though I knew that it was. And I would sit there and say I would never stay in a relationship that I was unhappy and I just leave, or why isn't she just leaving? But then I was in it and I didn't leave and I stayed. And even when we broke up, sometimes even not wanting to be with him, I would think like maybe I can settle, or maybe I can go back and make it work. You know, maybe I was being dramatic, and you know, maybe it was really just all me. And I think that within itself is toxic. So for anyone who is watching and who maybe is going through something, or who has gone through something, like it does get better. You definitely start new, and sometimes most times 9 out of 10, it's usually 10 times better than what you were in originally. So it's scary, and that fear does linger. Like it was said, like when you're healing, it's not that one day you're going to wake up and everything's going to be okay. There will be hard days after all the progress. It's just a matter of keep going and don't give up, because there are things that works. And I strongly believe in that. And prayer and God is something that I take very seriously. I value, and I don't really care what people say. I feel like people are always ashamed to say that, but you shouldn't be. God definitely saves you in some moments. And I know like in high school, when I went through certain things, praying was one of the things that did help me. And even just the last thing I just wanted to say was, there's this sentence that my mom said to me, and in all my prayers, I always say it. And like I say, like, I trust your process and I believe in this. And I even got it tattooed on myself, and it's everything happens for a reason. And I truly believe that. And I know that sometimes we go through things that are awful, and sometimes it's hard to even find the reason behind it, but we can get through it. We can grow, and God has a plan for all of us. And I really do believe that.
For those that may have been thinking about leaving, you're not alone. Don't be afraid of yourself. For those that are going through healing, like ourselves that are still going through this healing process, take the time to take a deep breath, look in the mirror, and speak affirmations to yourself. I am enough. I am strong. I am power. I am beautiful. And to daily tell yourself that you love yourself, because there's nothing like loving yourself first. Because once you get to understand the worth of yourself, the worth of your voice is power, that you will grow, you will blossom. We were all meant to go through something, or we wouldn't have these understandings of who we are as individuals. It's part of our growth. We're supposed to go through the emotions. We're supposed to be free to express, right now I'm not happy. Right now I am sad, or even to break down. It is okay to have those breakdown moments, because it's part of our emotions that we're broken inside. And it's okay to feel broken. It's okay to feel like, okay, what happened to me? You know, you have to allow yourself to process those things, and also to never allow somebody to tell you that, no, you need to get over it. No, I have to go through this. Allow yourself to feel every emotion and go through that process for you to come out of something that creates the strongest strength within yourself.
Thanks, Gabby. So I'm just going to end us off in prayer tonight. And I would just urge you to seek God, to ask yourselves these questions, to talk to your family. I think one of the things that you have heard here is that we all have seen or heard about instances within our own families of abuse. And so it was kind of something that was repeated. And as a Christian, I don't believe in generational curses. I believe in generational blessings, but I believe that we can repeat things if we're not acknowledging it. And so this right here is breaking a chain, because we're saying something about it and we're stepping forward. And so if you're in this space, there is a way out. So let's pray. Jesus, we thank you. We thank you that we had the ability to come and share pieces of our story, God. I pray for every woman who is here interviewing, that they may continue their path of healing. But I also pray for those who are watching right now, who are finding themselves in this situation, or who have recently got out of it, or maybe are even triggered by it. I pray that you would just remind them that you love them so much, and that you have good for them. You have good for them, that their inheritance is good and kindness. God, that they don't deserve to be stuck in a situation where they feel scared or threatened or unhappy. God, I pray that you would give them strategy and wisdom and protection as they seek to find help, God. I pray that you would soften the heart of those who are also kind of perpetrating the abuse, God. They need prayer too. I pray that you would take hold of their lives, God, that you would help them deal with whatever it is that's in them that's causing them to do this. God, I pray right now for every woman who hasn't been believed in their story. I pray that you would walk with them. I pray that you would listen to them. I pray that you would bring somebody who would believe them, who would acknowledge the pain that they've been through. I thank you, God, that you are a total and complete healer. I thank you that you're not interested in just healing a little tiny part of us, but all of us, the entire being. So we pray right now that we would surrender the pain, the hurt to you. God, we thank you that you have never left our side. We put all of our hope, all of our trust, all of our faith in you, God. And we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Hey, ladies, if you are watching and you want more information, I'm going to definitely put the contact below so that you can reach out either to Nat or Jay or Gabby or myself. I know that Gabby does work in this area as well. And of course, she has her podcast. What's the name of your podcast, Gabby?
Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it. And we'll put a link towards that too. And then Jay, you have your blog. What's the name of that?
Give some hope.
And for me, if you want to check out more services or you're interested in starting a conversation, check out bravelyrise.com. I run retreats. Right now we're on pause because lovely COVID, but soon, hopefully, we run retreats with women who have been through any level of trauma, be it, family things, stuff that has never been uncovered before, and just kind of helping you to tell your story for the first time in a place that you will be believed and heard and encouraged. So be sure to check that out. Until next time, take care.